then I can just ask you the questions.
Go on.
Okay. Ananda Devi, what's your message and what do you want people to really get?
Wow, that's a wonderful question, James Toole. I don't really think I have a message, to be honest with you. My message is, if I do have a message, it's probably just that people wake up as fast as possible and that they are true to themselves and live their lives accordingly. That would be my message, to awaken as soon as possible and be yourself. Yes.
Okay. Ba-bam.
Bam.
And how did you and Ramaji meet, and how did that meeting change your life?
Well, I have elaborated on a lot of that story in prior interviews. So we met in Alpine, and it changed my life significantly, because I was on a certain trajectory, and it just shifted almost immediately once I met him. And I knew that he and I would be doing something together, but I just wasn't sure what my role would be. I wasn't sure how exactly it would present itself. And slowly but surely it just came to us, and we began to work together. One thing led to another, and my life shifted completely, because I went from a very conventional lifestyle into this role that I now find myself in, as I guess the best way to call it is being a spiritual kind of consultant, if anything. It doesn't have anything to do with me. You know, it's not my power. I don't use my power to help people. All I do is I use the RASA, and there are many other RASA givers just like me. You know, Ramaji and I are just doing what we do. We do it. We don't think about it. We are very spontaneous in how we do things. We love to be ourselves. We love to engage in groups. We love to help people, and for us that's the joy. The more the merrier. So, and that's why I do this. It is very weird to be doing what I'm doing right now. Very weird. I cannot even begin to tell you how weird it is. Yes. But I enjoy it. I love doing what I do.
So in that context, have you always been somebody that people have come to for advice?
All my life. It's strange, and I don't know why. Maybe you can help me out a bit, being the human design expert, the gate of the listener. But yes, you know, I've always had friends and relatives, and people usually tell me about their story, you know, and I had that growing up a lot, and as well as always. So this has come relatively naturally to me. Because I really enjoy listening. I learn so much about other people, and they help me evolve. You know, I'm not the only one helping out. I'm listening and I'm learning all the time. So I always feel that there's this flow between myself and the seeker, or myself and the student, or myself and the friend. And it's beautiful. It really is.
I'm going to throw in some of my own questions, because So when you say evolve, what exactly do you mean by evolve? What part of you is evolving? What part of you is not evolving?
Well, I went through significant, you know, I never really talk about this, which is strange, but I went through, as a child, I had relatively significant awakenings that I didn't understand. And as I grew up, I found myself as a very dedicated wife and mother, and I still am, of course, a mother. I love my children, and I was very. I was never really a materialist, only into the material world, but I was kind of in between these two ideas. The one being wanting the conventional life, you know, wanting the house and the comforts and all that. And the other was having these spiritual awakenings that I really didn't know what to do with. And I had no how to integrate them. Uh-oh.
You've disappeared.
I'm coming back.
Magic.
Here, am I back?
Not for me.
Hold on.
Yes.
Now I'm back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just, I guess, like everybody else, I was caught up in how I was conditioned, how I thought life should look. And I was surrounded by people that had the same kind of, I would say maybe a vibration as I did, were interested in the same things as I was. And I started to lose touch and lose interest and just felt very lonely for a significant amount of time. So I think what happened, started to evolve within me, was that seeker mentality. What's missing? What's wrong? Why, when everything seems so perfect on the outside, do I still feel this lack? You know, I never felt very fulfilled. But at the same time, I was going through the spiritual stuff. And then there was a significant thing that took place. And after that, I got it. You know, from my perspective, you know, I had what you call, I would say, mystical experiences. I had realized then that I'd had them as a child, but except I didn't know it. In other words, I didn't know it then, and then when I started to experience them again, then I recognized them as being what had happened when I was 13. So then it started to fall into place for me. And I guess the biggest change for me was, what do I want to do now? What do I want to do next? And the only thing that made any sense was service. And that's what I get a kick out of. That's what brings me my joy and my bliss and my happiness. Not dependent on my states anymore. I used to think that it was. I used to yearn for the, you know, the bliss, the love, the certain experience that would make me feel elevated. But you know, they never last. So you swing. The pendulum swings, and this happens, and then that happens. The opposites just show themselves to you, and then the real awakening is recognizing that you're beyond it all, and that you always are here, and you always are that, and regardless of what is happening, you just start to perceive it in a completely different way. And that's what started to happen with me. And that was just before I met Ramaji. So all this started to fall into place. And when I met Ramaji, there was this recognition, which is how we came to work together in the first place. Because I think our message is similar, you know?
Right. So you mentioned when you were 13, so I've heard that Kundalini was, or, you know, that word Kundalini was part of that process. For you, what does that mean?
Oh, well, another interesting question. I don't like to speak about my experiences, but I will today. Well, okay, so when I was 13, I used to have experiences that would keep me awake while I was sleeping. In other words, when I fell asleep, I would be able to stay awake during the night in my sleep. And I was terrified because I didn't know what was going on, and I had no spiritual context. And this would happen over and over again. And I had difficulty returning into my living body. So at first it was very scary, and I didn't know what to do. But after a while, it became very peaceful, and I really loved to go there. And then I started to wonder, as a 13-year-old, this is going to sound strange as well, but I'll say it like it is. Am I actually dead? Is nothing really happening? What is going on? And I didn't want to talk to anybody about it, because I didn't want my parents to think that I was crazy. I didn't have any friends who knew what was going on. So I kept it private. I was a private kid, very outgoing, but I became terrified of going to sleep on and off. And then I started to enjoy it. And so this started to happen to me at 13. And then it passed, and I started to be a regular teenager at the age of like 16 or 17. But those moments you don't lose. It's funny, you just don't lose them. The Kundalini would happen after that. So I would have that time in my sleep. And when I would arrive back in my form, I had the bliss and the love experiences that were just beyond belief. I just felt the oneness, the beauty of the world and my own self in such a big way that I didn't want to even go to school. You know, I was just really taken aback by all the stuff going on. And but I did, you know, I coped. I don't know how I coped actually, but I did. And and I shifted in and out of this over my teenage years into my 20s, where I then began to realize, oh boy, I better start. I wanted to become I wanted to understand more, which started actually for me within religion. I started to study religions, and that led into non-duality. And only in my 30s did I even learn about the word Kundalini. And did I even learn about that these phases of consciousness called a Turiya and this year and that year? That's when I studied it, and it became, oh. So I realized that I'd had all this go on. I just had no clue at the time that it was going on, or that there was anything remotely special about me, because that's not what you get from it, James. What you get from it is that you are no different to the milkman. Everything is what you are.
Milkman rocks.
I love the milkman. You know, milkman, whoever, whatever. It's just, it really is all one thing, you know. So it was young for me to get all that.
So just because you have your own sort of flavor, like all teachers do, and you mentioned religions. So which ones in particular did you resonate with, and that probably come into your, let's call it presentation, since you don't like to call yourself a teacher?
Well, I studied all of them. I'm Jewish by birth. I loved my religion. I did a lot of Jewish studies. I then went on to learning about Jesus and all the religions, the Eastern religions. And then I finally found myself really desperately longing for a teacher. And this was in my, I would like to say, a long time ago. I don't remember the year. And I remember waking up one morning and driving around looking for something, except I didn't know what exactly it was that I was looking for. And I found this little Kabbalah center around the corner from where I live. And I just walked in there and I met the person who would then teach me for 7 years. And I became immersed in that study. And I would say that it is just one of the most beautiful, real, grounding and practical studies anyone could ever embrace. I didn't do it from the point of view of being a Jew necessarily. I was with teachers who taught people of all religion. So it wasn't about being a certain religion or a woman. You know, a lot of people associate the Kabbalah, you have to be a male, you have to be over 40, else you can't study. Not where I learned. Where I learned, they embraced us all. And it was awesome, fabulous. They ground me down. They ground you down. They ground down your ego. They teach you hardcore stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah, in a loving way.
That's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you mentioned becoming a mother of actually triplets, and if you could speak more about that and how that's sort of, let's say, affected your ongoing process.
Perhaps my biggest lessons have been through motherhood. my children are my greatest teachers. If anybody teaches you what it is that you still have within that needs to dissolve, it's being annoyed by 3 teenagers.
I'll do it.
And besides that, the fact that they are the loves of my life, the unconditional love aspect of just loving people, children, regardless of how they speak to you, what they do, you know, it's such a selfless job being a mother. And I often think to myself, it's so underrated in so many respects, because moms, it really is, you know, moms could awaken faster than I would say most people. Why? And ask yourself why. It's because we're naturally selfless. We go through our days forgetting that there is a self. You're so busy caring and not sleeping and sharing and doing that you have that, you know, that non-doership feeling, like, how did I actually do that year? Was I even there? So, you know, my mothering, my mother role, and always reminds me of just how significant the study is, you know, non-doership is, awakening is. It gives you wonderful little hints along the way. I've loved being a mother. I love being a mother, James. And I've got such good kids, just so you know. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Let's say Rama G says he's just getting into people to LOC, what you guys call LOC 1000, or self-realization, if you like that term. But that's what he's into, just getting them into that 1000. But he says that that's not so much your approach. You're more concerned with character, goodness, kindness, sort of everyday characteristics. So how do you blend that in with this idea that everything's one, let's say non-dual?
Yes.
And the dual.
Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of the seekers and students come into the study from, maybe it's the like, as the Buddhists say, it's the dry way. In other words, they're using their intellect to finally take them to a certain point, and then when they get to that point, they have to drop it, and that's when they actually drop into what we call, you know, real non-doership, no separate self. And that's one thing, and I really do focus on that, because I believe that in order to progress past the 1000 mark, it's important to get to 1000. In other words, the stages that get you there are so important, and that's where my work is focused. But that's not it for me, because for me, and maybe it is my background, maybe it is because I've studied, you know, with certain teachers in the past, but I want to see how the students or the seekers manage to embrace this knowingness, if they really get it, into their lives. And that's where I get my most reward. That's where I don't like to finish them and not be in touch with them. I understand their process. I've lived their process for a long time. Therefore, I want to see that it starts to work for them. And what I usually notice, and again, it's not up to me. It's not even really up to them. It's how deep does this knowing go within them? And that I find is a post 1000 integration. And, you know, in Zen, they say it takes 7 years. Ramaji and I tend to see major changes after about a year. And then even for us, it's always deepening. So you're never really finished. It's just a continuous deepening into the great unknown, you know, the mysterious, I don't know, you know, but at the same time, you are viewing reality from a completely different perspective. It will never be the same again. It shifts into such a degree that, you know, I expect the changes. They happen for me, and I see them happening with the students as well. Otherwise, I wouldn't do this, because I would see no point. You know, I'd like to see people starting to cooperate more. I'd like to see people starting to be okay with, listen, we may have different truths, but your truth is fine for you and mine is good for me. Can't we still just be human beings and treat each other with human dignity and love in our hearts and accept that maybe my truth isn't the only truth and respect yours? You know, I see that that's so possible, and yet it's just not quite embraced by everybody yet. So
I guess that's
and that's big for me. That's part of what motivates me every day.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, this is directly from Ramaji. He says, you are a very attractive woman and you also tend to like to look good. And this is not typical of a non-dualist teacher.
Oh my God, I can't believe he wanted you to ask this, James. You would never ask this.
Yes.
It's hysterical.
Does that work for or against you as a non-duality teacher? And does that work for you or against you as someone who is unusually powerful at giving this RASA transmission that you and Ramaji give? I mean, does it work in your favor, do you think? Can it be both ways? Some people probably project and have an idea of, like that video with the beard and mustache, like you just put out.
Yeah, like I just, because I find I love humor. I love to make jokes. I like to lighten things up. To me, I mean, nothing is quite as mind-stopping as a good laugh. If people did that more often, they'd really get the no-mind experience a lot more often. So yes, I like to add that in every now and then. Of course, I was just spoofing a little bit and having a little bit of fun, and I didn't know it was going to be posted, but it was, and fine. I'm good with it. I'm fine with it. Well, firstly, I don't really think of myself in those terms. I think of myself as wanting to be myself. Looking like a female and feminine is something I enjoy, and that's why I do it. I mean, I don't regard myself spirituality or looking good or how a person dresses. I just don't see the correlation between that and, being spiritual or non-spiritual. And I've never really understood that. For me, very much the spiritual notion, even the idea, has dropped away. I'm not prepared to conform and be anything that I'm not. If I feel like getting up and staying in my pajamas all day and somebody wants to interview me on that particular day, and you've seen me, we've chatted before, and I'm in my pajamas. But today, so it just depends on where I'm at and what I feel like doing. Do people get offended by that sometimes or think that maybe I'm not the real deal? That's up to them. Again, I can't help anybody or stop them from thinking or feeling what they do. All I can do is be myself. And if they have an issue, it's really none of my business. And so I don't take it too seriously. I very rarely get upset about it. And if I do, it's usually because they've insulted me directly, having never met me. But again, it's, it comes and goes just like every other arising. And I think women should look nice. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah. That's the way I see it.
Okay, so let's go on to the RASA itself. Why don't you, in your own words, explain exactly what you feel the RASA transmission is and what it does and perhaps where it's coming from?
Well, the RASA it's interesting because before I met Ramaji, I was not at all learned, or I had never done any studying. I wasn't interested in spiritual transmission. For me, it was the very first time he had given me, I received a transmission and I had no idea why. Having said that, it helped me so tremendously with my integration. And then I took a while, about a year or maybe even longer, before I really wanted to start giving the RASA to people. In other words, my own experience was such that unless I'm coming from my most ethical place, unless I know that what I'm doing is 1,000,000,000% working, I'm not going to do it, because that would make me a liar. And I don't do anything I don't firmly believe in. So I started to then sit with Ramaji in his sessions, and I started to go through the process with people and actually watch how this transformation took place with them for many months. And then I started to join him slowly but surely. We would give the RASA together. He never pushed me. He never said, you have to do this or I don't have to do this, but he wanted me to. He wanted me to teach. And then when I started to take on my own students, I then had my own like existential experience of the shifts that took place with them and my own joy in giving the RASA. My favorite part about the RASA is that it isn't mine. So I can get out the way. You know, in a strange way, I often think about channels when I think about RASA, because it's like what a channel is doing is they're channeling a higher power, and it's not got nothing to do with them. And often they don't even remember what they're saying, you know, or whatever. This is very similar in that we are just acting as bridges. In other words, we are helping the seeker before us make that connection, which of course they already have, but there are blockages in their system which are not allowing them to fully, you know, do whatever needs to be done in order for this to take place within them. And then we basically just help the process along. We're not doing it. We're just acting as the bridge. It's like, I guess the best way to explain what we are is being bridges. We are bridges for them to access their own divinity. You know, their own divinity is always there for them. They just don't know it. You know, I mean, people that are asleep, James, are asleep. It means they are continuously living a life in their mind. They are not at all in their now. So they don't realize it. And then the only reason we have to talk at all is to help them understand their own process, because they get confused a little bit, maybe some memory loss, what's going on with me. I had a sudden, you know, experience. What does that mean? So we just mentor them along that process until they get to whatever 1000. Usually, you know, it's interesting because they go through that, the experiential, existential phase of like, feeling the oneness and the love and the bliss, almost Kundalini-like, you know? And then it moves into all the different LOC levels, you know, which one can read about in the book 1000. I don't have to go there now. And then the final drop is, of course, right, this, you know, but you can't just say to a person, this is it, and expect them to get it right away. Because they don't, and they're not going to. You know, as frustrating as it is, they're not going to. So you have to help them along. And maybe it's my destiny.
Apparently.
We shall see. Because I really don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I mean, I really do whatever spontaneously arises right now. I don't think much anymore. The thoughts over my life started tapering off to the point that I don't really believe my own story. So it became so habitual that when I get into a state where there is a lot going on in my life, which is interesting because recently I went through a very traumatic 2 years where I actually had to use a lot of thinking, whereas before I was very peaceful in being. And that came into play, and just the acceptance of everything as it arose within me and being able to just be with it helped. It really did. And that's why I think I'm able to go there with my students, you know, get into the mud with them. I'm not afraid. I don't have to stay anywhere. I will go there with them into their suffering, into their pain, into their story for as long as it takes to help them understand that they are not that story. And so that's really what we do. Does that answer the question?
It does for me. Well, yeah, I believe so. So let me just see. Okay, this is a good question. What does your family think of you being a non-duality teacher? And are they impressed by the fact that you have all these students, or do they think you're kind of nutty?
Well, I have the most incredible family. I'll say that much. They are not like me. Do they think I'm nutty? Absolutely. They don't think it, they know it, because I am nutty. But at the same time, they didn't want to hear about it. It didn't resonate with them. I didn't feel comfortable explaining my experiences, and I didn't feel that on the spiritual path I could really turn to them, not because they haven't got compassion and aren't fantastic people, just because it's very difficult when you just don't have that Kundalini experience. You don't have that need for more. You're not questioning. You're very happy within the context of your life and what is going on, and their lives really work for them. And I only want them to be happy. I don't really see that they are any less evolved than I am. I see that they're perfect within their process, and whatever they're going through really works for them, and I just respect them for that. And they've always been such an inspiration because they own it, they are it, and good for them. You know, my life just went like kind of on a different kind of path, let's say that. And so it's taken time. I would say it's taken about 10 years for them to really acknowledge that I do this. They don't really talk to me about it or ask me questions, but they know what I do. And again, I can go into that world and be in that world very happily, and I never have to discuss this stuff with them. And why would I? They're not interested. It's like saying to a golfer, you know, I don't play golf, I'm not interested, I don't know anything about the game. Do I need to hear about your game and, you know, how many holes you know, or anything, what's your handicap? I'm not really interested. So, you know, you find common ground with people. You really do. And spiritual people, seekers, I think a big part of this process is finding your people, is finding the ones that resonate with you, the ones you can be authentic with, making really good friendships. A lot of my work in the RASA world is to hook up the posties, the ones that get to 1,000, and then they are living in various countries or cities, and they feel maybe a little bit lonely, a little bit isolated. And so I often, you know, get a little group together, and then they can hang out and they can talk to each other about their process. And that, I find that to be very helpful. I mean, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback about the friendships they were developing and what's going on with them. I think it's important. But not to separate us, you see. It's not to create more separation. It's just to know that you have your little, what's the word? To have your little group, to have your vibration met at a certain level where that you can integrate and help each other out. But at the same time, it's important to know that you're no better or worse than anybody else or any other group. It's all one thing. It really is. So, and that's the teaching. That's why I sometimes get pissed off about spirituality in general.
Well, in that flavor, I think I missed one, because I want to ask this. Okay, you've talked about, since we're kind of getting into more manifestation, you definitely deal with this term manifestation. And do you mean so-called law of attraction? Exactly what do you mean by manifestation, since you're bringing
okay yeah, it's funny because after I finished seeking, and I mean finished seeking, I remember the day very clearly. I came home, I packed up my books into the biggest box you've ever seen, and I then donated them. And then for a couple of years, I didn't want to talk about it. I had nothing more to say. I just wanted to be with myself, be with my children, figure it out, you know. I understood what needed to be understood at that time, and it dropped away. And at that point, I'm very much a person who loves to learn and so I started to delve into a little bit of astrology for fun, a little bit of manifestation, the law of attraction, learning, because I mean, again, they were my hobbies. Ultimately, does it matter? No, not really. But the other thing that happens is you tend to come from a place where you feel very fulfilled because you now have discovered your own inner kind of joy, that joy that arises within you that isn't dependent on anything that you could possibly have from the outside, or not even a boyfriend, girlfriend, not even a love relationship. It's self-generating. So a lot of people would say, well, if you fulfill, then of course, why bother with manifestation? And I agree to a large extent, because you don't really feel you need to, but desire is something you can never get rid of. Just like my desire was to continue learning. I didn't create that desire, it arose in me. So with that arising, I started to play with manifestation a little bit, thinking to myself, okay, I wonder how this works. And I started to notice that as I wasn't coming from a place of lack anymore, in other words, I was completely indifferent about the outcome, I started to be able to use my focus very well, because I realized that I had a power of focus, not just me, but this intelligence focuses and is busy all day long, Shakti. And so I just really got in touch with my own Shakti and started to use her and embody her. And I started to come up, I guess, with what I think is a very beneficial understanding and teaching about manifestation post-awakening, or even for people who just want to manifest from that different space. It's not necessarily about the car or the house, unless that's what you desire, but you'd be surprised what can be focused upon and somehow delivered. You know, it's not about the details. You don't know how these things happen. You don't have to. But the only thing we really know is what we're really focusing on at that particular moment in time. Is the cup half full or is it half empty? You know, a lot of it is attitudinal positivity, and a lot of it is allowing the negativity in order to get to the state of being in the positive frame of mind. So that was very much how I started to integrate and then play with via my own experience. I never speak from anything but my own existential experience. I used to, it's funny, I used to study and I used to memorize, and I used to come from a very much more intellectual space, thinking that that would help. But I found that I wasn't helping. And I found that the more I stopped that kind of, I don't know, talk, and the more I started using my own experience as a guideline to help another person, it worked better for me personally as a teacher, or as a mentor, as a friend. Whereas I do know, though, that there is so much to be said about the intellectual way as well. There's no doubt. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, it just doesn't work for me. That's all. Anymore. It used to. Nothing counts more than existential experience.
So it seems like, in general, in the spiritual communities and all, that there's this movement away from the word enlightenment and more towards this word authenticity.
Embodiment.
Embodiment also. Okay.
And the reason I think that is because people are awakening quickly. I really believe that. I mean, I've seen long-time seekers. You were one of them. Pop. Bam. You know, just the instant, like, aha is happening so much more quickly now. And it's not just because of the rasa. There are many, many other ways to awaken. You know, there are many other transmissions, there are many other teachers, there are many other satsangs. But I would say that, you know, for me, that's half the story. Okay, so what? You know, a lot of the times the people get to 1,000 and they're just as stuck as they were before. Because once again, you have to deal with your integration. You have to deal with the past momentum. And then what are you going to do with your life? How are you going to bring heaven into earth? How authentic are you being? How are you being of service? And do you really understand the way this universe works? Just on a general basis. You need to embody the power that you are. because we are all very powerful people. And until we do have certainty in this force that we are and always have been, and we don't listen to the little mind's doubts and the little mind's unworthinesses and the little mind's should I, shouldn't I, and you have no ability to actually recognize your guidance system, which is always coming in the form of your feelings, what feels good and what doesn't feel good. It's as simple as that. And then being able to go with it, you know, you still feel stuck. So, but once you integrate and you start to get that, you are able to then really embody your awakened state. And we don't know how it will look necessarily, but yet the right people come into play, the right opportunities. And if you grab them and if you get a yes and you go with it, life just starts to work, you know, most of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time. At least for me, this is what I found. And for a lot of people I know that I'm working with. And again, you know, it's very much in line with what you do too, James. I mean, the human design, something you use, that yes, that no, you know, as a manifester, what you are. So you have to wait for that invitation. And when you get the yes from the invitation, you jump into it. It's really all these studies now that have somehow come up in this age of Aquarius. What is that saying to us? That this age of Aquarius is an age of awakening to our own potential. It's our own potential. It can only happen through you, me, us. And it's not just mine or yours, it's everybody's right and birthright to live their potential. And, you know, again, it's this idea that it's not here. And what happens is the more you embrace and embody your awakening, the more you actually recognize that the kingdom, the heaven is this. It's here. It's always been here, but we haven't been able to see. We've been blinded by our mind and by our crap and by our stories. So the lens shifts and you find yourself the same person, almost in the same life. Nothing much has changed outside of you, but the inner understanding is the bliss, is the yes, is the okay, I can deal with whatever comes up, the surrender to the now, more or less. It's really beautiful. And it again, it takes time. It takes time.
Lovely. So, since we just addressed enlightenment, there's a question here that says, you have referred to enlightenment as the ego's biggest disappointment. So does it mean it's not worth having?
That's hilarious. Well, let's talk about an ego. Okay, let's talk about that little separate self and what it is always searching for outside of itself. Experiences, because this experience they're having right now isn't enough. It's always looking for a heightened state, because the state you're in is never good enough. And so when you awaken, and I call a real awakening, is dropping into the state you're in, not needing your state to be blissful or the opposite. It's understanding that what you are comes very much before the state. However, you're still feeling the state and in the state. So you're kind of doing this dance, Shiva and Shakti dance all day long. The ego wants it to be very special. The ego wants it to be blissful and loving all the time. And then when you really get it, you recognize that the states were just an escape. The authentic awakening is realizing that no, you don't need a state. So your need for the states drops, bam, and you're embodying what you actually are and always have been. And again, now I'm sounding a little bit like a ranting, non-dual teacher, but it's true. Everything they've written is actually true. from the very famous mystics. This now is it. And that is the biggest aha, when you realize that you don't need to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. You can just really be. And the stillness arrives once you've dropped the need to go anywhere else. And remember, you're only going anywhere else in your mind. Your story is taking you outside of here. So the more that dissolves, kind of like the, oh my gosh, I'm so not that good with words, forgive me. But the more that resistance dissolves to this, the more you're able to blossom as that. Does that make any sense? I don't even know. I really don't.
Perfect.
Some people have said to me, you know, Ananda, why don't you write a book on non-duality? I said, because my book would say Non-Duality by Ananda Devi, and the book would be empty. There'd be nothing written in the pages. There really is nothing to get, James.
It's amazing how many words come out of all these different teachers to get that point across.
Correct.
I guess it just takes a different flavor or a different little pat on the back, whatever you want to call it.
And you know, that's why for those 2 years after my awakening, I had no desire to talk about it anymore, because the deep realization that there was nothing to say dawned on me. And so I was very much able to just peacefully be. And at the same time, very engaged and enjoying my world. But then when I was suddenly make Ramaji and all that happened, I knew that I was never going to use the same lingo. I had to come across, I had to be somewhat more, firstly, I had to have to be myself. So whatever would come out of me, if it is at all helpful to a listener, great. I mean, for the people that long for that, you know, intellectual understanding, they can go anywhere else and they will get it. You know, but for me, if you really are around an embodied person, somebody who lives it, it's more effective. And then, of course, we come into what you're just talking about, the transmission part. And that's why I love transmissions now, because it's silent and you're doing what you're doing and you're not claiming any form of like egotistic, you know, like it's not mine. So it's got nothing to do with me, and heaven forbid anybody should ever think it has. And you're able to do this for another person or with another person, or somehow be a part of it, and something happens and they awaken, and they can awaken quickly. And that's why I know that it's literally a gift. It's a wonder. It's a gift. It astounds me when I see what happens with this. I literally get blown away because I notice this shift take place with people over time. And I can't believe it's the same person sitting in front of me. I get surprised. And often. And that's why I just think it's just so incredibly amazing, which is why I do it. And Ramaji and I are very aware that we need help with this, you know, which is in effect why we started to, you know, first Ramaji recognized the need to spread it. You know, there's so much we can do as two people. So many students you can take in a day. Sometimes you're working all day long. So the other RASA givers are fantastic as well, in that they can do the transmission now and really help.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And the other thing I always do as well, just so you know, James, and I'm just going to add this in here because of your work and because I know who you are. That, you know, you're a student who is awakened, and not a student, my friend, and you're awakened, and you are a human design expert, in my opinion. And I mean, for me, post-awakening, even maybe 10 years post-awakening, I don't know how long has it been, the human design has still helped me. It has still helped me understand myself. you know, the gates and the centers. And I find it to be, again, it's another way to truth via understanding yourself, because you cannot change your nature. You can improve on it, but you are still going to be you. And the sooner you understand how you operate from that avenue, I say it's an amazing tool. Hats off to you for helping me. Thank you, because you do with that a lot.
The beauty of sharing, I guess. And
you've helped me with my kids, understanding their human design, which has just been so fantastic. Loved it. Loved learning.
I look forward to meeting you. I think we've touched on pretty much a lot tonight.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.